say whenever you'd like.
Okay. Thanks so much, Shuthu and Gabe and the organizers of this great event. And thanks to all of you. This is an amazing turnout. Thanks to everyone who's online too, joining us. So my name's Alexei. I'm presenting to you today in two capacities, I guess. One is as an author at No Starch Press. I have an upcoming book called Social Media Observatory. If you're familiar with No Starch Press, it's really a hackers, geeks kind of press. And the books are very hands-on and practical. So my book is no exception. You can think of it as a walkthrough with all the code, step by step, how to build a full stack web application for monitoring social media, for collecting the data, in particular scraping the data, and analyzing it for the public interest. And the contents of the book, you're going to basically have a sneak preview this evening. The book is already partially available online. You can buy it pre-ordered on a discount from that link in the slides. And it overlaps substantially with the work that I do professionally. So the other capacity in which I'm speaking to you tonight is as the head of the digital trace team at the Canadian Media Ecosystem Observatory, MEO, as we call it. It's a project based out of McGill University. It is publicly funded by taxpayers like yourselves. Thank you. And our mandate is to monitor Canadian political discourse, particularly online, and to report back to all of you, to the public, on the state of the Canadian media ecosystem. In particular, detecting online harms such as disinformation, foreign interference, hate speech, polarization, all that kind of stuff. But in general, monitoring the media ecosystem and reporting back to the public. So before I get into the details, I promised that I will talk about techniques and tools, and this will be appealing to hackers in the crowd. But I just want to start very abstractly by asking, why in the first place do we need media? And I begin the book with this quote from Dr. Manhattan. So Dr. Manhattan, if you all know from the comic series, the comic book The Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan can replicate himself all over space, and he's basically omniscient. He can be everywhere, doing multiple things. He can multitask like nobody. I can't do that. If you're unlike Dr. Manhattan, the rest of us are finite. We're stuck in one place. We can't be everywhere at once. We can't see everything that's going on. And so how do we know if, I've never been to Ukraine, for example. So how do I know what's going on in Ukraine? I rely on the media. The media tells me, oh, there's this country called Ukraine. Next to it, there's a country called Russia. Russia is invading Ukraine, right? How do I know about this? How do I know about Gaza or what's happening there? I rely on media. It used to be 2 decades and longer ago, news media was our primary filter on reality. We would go to news media to find out what are the events that happen today, what are the pressing issues, what do we need to worry about. Social media has substantially taken over that role in the past 20 years. In some ways, it's kind of eclipsed news media. It's crowded it out. In other ways, news media is adapted by making itself appealing on social media. But social media is effectively how we are getting our news, learning about current events. It's shaping our reality. And so it has enormous power over us. And consequently, it makes sense that we should then be critical of it. We should be thinking about, well, who actually is pushing this information? This is not a set of publicly minded civil servants just faithfully trying to find out the truth for you and reporting it to you in the most sensible order and with the highest priorities. These are very interested actors. There are content creators on social media that are trying to manipulate you for their own particular interests. There are algorithms that are sorting that content so that you consume it according to whatever will maximize your engagement and therefore help the bottom line of the social media company. And you've got the companies behind that are sort of indifferent to how the media ecosystem is operating. So what you need is an observatory, something like a Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan has this wonderful line. He says, "I've witnessed events so tiny and so brief, they can scarcely be said to have occurred at all." And this is kind of what we do at Mio, is we witness these brief, ephemeral social media missives, all these posts and images and videos that go up and then are never seen or heard of again. But in the meanwhile, they've influenced you. They've shaped somehow your perception of reality. Okay, enough of the abstraction. And we'll come back to manufacturer consent later. But how this looks is, so for example, my team and I at Mio, we track all of the major social media platforms that Canadians are active on. And so we can see, just for example, we can see engagement trends over the last several years, disaggregated by political party. So these are Canadian politicians, liberals or conservatives or NDP. How are they faring on these different platforms? I mean, did you all know as Canadians, right, that the liberals have a presence on TikTok and the conservatives don't? Right? Or that it's completely reversed on YouTube? Did you all know that after Elon Musk took over X, Canadian conservative politicians have enjoyed a substantial uptick in engagement relative to liberals? May or may not be aware that Meta, a foreign corporation, basically shut off news access for Canadians in August 2023. Engagement with Canadian news outlets on Facebook and Instagram just dropped off a cliff, has been devastating for Canadian news, particularly local outlets. We were also able to track that Canadians who were particularly dedicated to political discourse circumvented this and started sharing screenshots of news, even though they knew the URLs were blocked. These are all things you can find out when you're tracking the discourse at scale. I won't be able to explain all these different maps. We can come back to them during Q&A, but we have these beautiful network maps of engagement. We track politicians at the provincial level and federal level. We track all of the news outlets, any of the major journalists, many civil society organizations. We track basically all of the elite, if you will, of the political discourse that shape how we that shape the discourse, shape how we talk about Canadian politics. We can see what topics they're engaging with, how it breaks down across different parties. We can look at semantic similarity between what different people are saying. We can see the proximity between foreign media entities and our domestic entities, where those points of intersection lie. We can see polarization down to the provincial level. This was when we were looking at Alberta elections. And we're tracking across all these different platforms. So we can see how people shift from one to another or substitute. This is the team. I wanted to make sure everyone saw their faces. These are the superheroes behind all of this work. It's a small team of very talented people. And also Dr. Manhattan wants to be included. You are also a superhero. I agree. Okay. Okay, but this technology that we're developing, it's not only useful for Canada. So in fact, in my book, there's case studies in almost every chapter, but none of them actually pertain to Canada. It's all international. So I start off the book with a list of Telegram channels that are Russian disinfo agents talking about Ukraine, framing that conflict, as you can imagine, in a very particular way. And I show you exactly how to set up a Telegram stack to track these actors and how to build this interface that you're seeing. Then we apply it in chapter 4 to a white supremacist network that crosses Europe and North America. And you can extract the URLs that they're sharing in their Telegram messages to recover the domains and get a sense of what out on the open web, or what are the sites that they're referencing as they're talking about white supremacist content. I also show you how to do some data archaeology in chapter 5. We look at the Wayback Machine and all these tweets that were archived from before the January 6th insurrection. And I show you how to dig those out and reconstruct what that discourse looked like and who were some of the main agitators for what happened on January 6th. This Facebook scraper is not included in the book, but the techniques you learn in the book will show you how to build it. And so here I'm looking at a hate and disinfo network in Tunisia that's supportive of the president there, and coming up with a very false and hateful narrative about African migrants to Tunisia. We can map all of that activity. And this work I'm very proud of, I'll present in chapter 6 of the book. This concerns archiving the Gaza genocide on Instagram. So all of the posts, the images and videos that are coming out of Gaza over the past couple of years. In effect, this both shows the promise and the peril of social media. On the one hand, social media is this way to circumvent a blackout on traditional news, where international news agencies couldn't get into Gaza or could only go in chaperoned, by the Israeli army. Here, content creators in Gaza are able to upload what they're seeing straight to social media. But Meta does not conceive of itself as a librarian of genocide. It's not going to go out of its way to preserve this content or to index it or to make it readily accessible to war crimes litigators and so forth. So civil society actors have taken it upon themselves, myself included, to archive all of this content, including at this point something like 300,000 videos showing the violence and the hardship that people have endured. I apologize. I should have just made the disclaimer that some of the imagery in my slides would be difficult to see. So how are we doing all of this? Okay, so the process is basically, in a nutshell, we cannot collect all of social media. Social media is vast. So we begin by relying on domain experts, folks who really understand, the white supremacist community, or the Russian disinfo community, or the Palestinian community in Gaza, or know Canadian politics really well. We rely on them to build rich lists of, these are the handles that you should track. These are the main actors in this context, and here are their social media handles. Go track their content. Then we create scrapers. In-house, we develop these computer programs that will systematically go through social media and hoover up all this data. The data then we need to index into some kind of a database technology. In the book, I teach scrapers for all of those platforms, and then I teach how to index the data into a PostgreSQL database. At McGill, we use an Elasticsearch solution. We can talk about different options. You don't want to extend access then to people directly to your database, so you build an API layer over that. So I teach that in chapter 8, how to build a fast API app and how to add authentication to that to make sure you're extending and managing access to collaborators you want to. For folks who are savvy with coding and data, they just like API access. That's actually our number one client for MEO, is just media researchers around the country who would just like to hook into our data and play with it. So they'll formulate some kind of a request, and our server will send them back the data, and they're off to the races. Other folks would prefer kind of like a user interface, something a little gentler, a little more intuitive, and they don't have to code. So that's great. I show in the book how to code a front end using Plotly. Plotly is a Canadian company actually based in Montreal. So the reason I called this talk Gray Hat Social Media is because not all of this is above board. The social media companies are not our friends. I'm not saying they're our enemies, but they're not our friends in this exercise. They don't actually want researchers in the public interest, journalists and scholars and civil society folks, to be collecting social media data and identifying shenanigans, as Joan Donovan would call it, online shenanigans taking place on their platform. So actually, we're always in danger of being sued. And when we're writing these computer programs to scrape these sites, we constantly have to be dodging anti-scraping defenses. We have to be timing and randomizing our requests. And, it requires, scrapers require a lot of upkeep. The development phase is never really over. If I have time, I'm not trespassing too much, I'll just describe a few scraping strategies. Is this okay? All right. Just a few strategies that I named them. Maybe they have actually official names, but this is what I came up with. So there's HTML parsing, API request manufacturing, or browser automation API response interception. So for HTML parsing, you have a static web page. You're gonna just issue a GET request, just like you take your browser, just visit the page, okay? Right click and go view page source, and you see all the HTML. You take that HTML tree and you're trying to parse it and look for regularities that will help you extract the information you want. So the perfect example of this is chapter 5 in the book, when you're looking at tweets that have been archived on the Wayback Machine. They're tweets from before January 6th. Many of them got deleted from Twitter. The accounts that tweeted them got suspended. Some of them got unsuspended after Musk took over Twitter. But this is data archaeology at this point. All you have is the HTML. So how are you going to find regularities in the data? So I show you how to do that. So here you can see that he's saying January 6th, see you in DC. And then over in the HTML, you find the particular tag where that text appears. And then you code based on that regularity and find and parse out the data each time. Now, when you have a live website, which is more typically the case for our work at McGill and in the book, your web browser, as you are visiting the site of one of these social media apps, your web browser is sending requests to the API, the API of Instagram, for example. As you're scrolling down your feed, your browser is contacting Instagram server and saying, hey, the client wants to see more data. Please send the next piece of content. Please send the next piece of content. Please send the next piece of content. So if you open up Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you pop up in Chrome developer tools and watch the requests, watch the network traffic, you'll see as you scroll, there'll be a request after request after request. This is how it looks actually for a Canadian Instagram account, Narcity Canada. As I'm scrolling down their content gallery, I'm picking up all these API calls. So I can see what my browser communicating with Instagram's API. So what you can do at that point is basically manufacture those calls. So you have a good look at the call that your browser is making. And then you say, okay, I'm going to recreate that call, but where it says Narcity Canada, I'll swap that out for another handle or so forth, or swap the dates or swap whatever the, and keep the CSRF token and keep the headers and so forth that make the request go through, but play around with that. That's great. You'll actually see that. I've provided a link there to a GitHub repo by Media Lab. It's a great lab over at Sciences Po in France. All of their scrapers on there, I think, are all API-based, request manufacturing-based scrapers. What's tough about that, though, is on the server side, it looks very inorganic. It doesn't look like a browser scrolling through the site. It looks like someone is, it looks like it's scraping. It looks like automated activity. So you can quickly get your account suspended or have to, get kicked into some kind of a timeout. So what I like to do, and what my teammate who works on, who maintains the Twitter scraper, he also likes to do, is we do browser automation and API response interception. So it's kind of a combined solution, best of both worlds. So you use a browser automation framework. In the book, I teach Playwright, and you automate your browser activity. So your computer program opens up a browser, signs into Instagram, looks like just like a real person, starts scrolling. That provokes all those requests, right, to the API. And then as the responses come, you grab them, make a copy, and save them. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. So you can see these. This is one of the accounts I track for the Gaza Instagram archive, but you can see. Look how nice those data are. I mean, they're very nicely structured, JSON formatted API responses coming in from Instagram. Just grab those as they're on their way in, and save them. So that's kind of the idea. It's kind of like a two-armed scraper. One arm is scrolling in order to provoke the API call and the API response, and then the other arm is kind of grabbing the data as it comes in. All right, I'll stop there because I know I'm going way over. But thank you very much. So my book is up on No Starch. You can learn more about my awesome team over at Mio from that link. And if you have a particular interest in the Gaza Instagram archive, just please reach out to me by email, and I can extend access. Thanks.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you on that incredibly insightful talk. We'll be answering some Q&As both in person and online. I think we'll start one in person and then go on to online. Anyone to start? Also, in case we don't get to all the questions, we'll also have a main presenter room as well. So starting off with.
Thank you so much for the talk. I wanted to follow up on Edward Bernays, as it's probably been about 100 years since some seminal books on propaganda. So I'm curious, what did we miss from Edward Bernays as part of your presentation?
Oh, okay. Perfect. Well, okay. So I only know tangentially of Bernays, so I'm not going to be able to. Did you? So I think basically Bernays, what he's learned about what he had learned about propaganda, I think that in turn has been marketed and optimized in order to seize our attention. The social media companies literally draw on insights from Bernays, but also from all the psychologists since then about how to seize our attention. Human beings have this particular bias called availability bias. So basically, when you're asked about, like if I say to you, how important is the issue of Ukraine, for example, you don't have a total overview of all pressing issues across the globe that by which you can kind of quantitatively and objectively order them as this one's the most important. Like climate change is most important, and then after that it's maybe like, I don't know, antibiotic resistant bacteria or something. Like you don't have a total overview of everything. So what you do, what everyone does, what I do, is you draw on your availability heuristic. You think about, well, what have I recently seen or heard about? And it turns out, if you've been exposed to some marketing, advertising, or if the news has carried a particular story a number of times prominently, that's what you remember. So someone says to you, Ukraine's really important. You're like, yeah, it's important. Yeah, I've heard of that recently. And so that is just a tip of the iceberg of all the different ways in which social media companies are manipulating us. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, this is too tangential, but based on a reading of the data that I've collected so far, which is pretty deep, which is quite deep as I can see from the graphs, what are some counterintuitive things that you have noticed about these networks or groups that share information, and do you think that they cut across like lines that we usually think are pretty polarized in daily life? That's what I'm basically asking. I'm not sure if this is something I can answer, but yeah.
So thanks for your question. Yeah, I mean, for example, in the to go back to one of the slides I didn't talk about much, the Alberta elections, which are now a couple of years old, but I think it's still illustrative. We were looking at Instagram data at the patterns of commenting from ordinary users on different candidates from, it was supposed to be a close election between the Conservatives and the NDP in Alberta. And what we found is, so what you're seeing in this map is indicative of echo chambering somehow. So the clustering of the orange nodes, these are NDP candidates. They're clustered close together because the same people who commented on one candidate tended to comment on the other. In other words, there were a set of folks who were just following and commenting, engaging with NDP-related content. And then on the other hand, there was a distinct set of people who were commenting on the conservative content. So they're both groups of Canadians who live in Alberta, they're on Instagram, but they're seeing separate, they have very different separate feeds. They're in, it's like they're in different worlds of media, and that different realities, different perceptions of what's going on. And you can also see how the news outlets, which are colored in green, how they're arrayed spatially. Like you notice Rebel News, True North Center are way over on the conservative side because no one from the NDP side is actually engaging with them. Calgary Herald and Edmonton Journal are actually sort of on the border between the two groups, which is nice. National Post, which should be a serious nationally scoped paper, nevertheless is like very partisan. It's like way over on the conservative side of the map. So yeah, yeah. So sorry, I hope that in part answers your question.
I think you did.
Yeah.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I have two quick questions. Can you tell us a little bit about what folks who consume your API do with the data, like what kind of work people are doing with it? And second question, what are your operating costs? And are you guys like funded academically, or what's this built and hosted on top of?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of how the data are being used, so we have collaborators, for example, in British Columbia who wanted to follow the British Columbia elections last year specifically. So we were tracking a whole bunch of politicians and news outlets associated with that election, and then they were pulling the data in to follow. So sometimes it's like a provincial focus. We had an external collaborator focused on right-wing extremism. So they wanted to track a particular set of accounts that we were following for them. So yeah, it depends on like different research priorities of scholars and journalists around the country. In terms of operating costs, you'll notice in the technologies that I listed over here that they're all free. Yeah, so Fast API, Postgre, Plotly, the community edition. These are all free technologies, and then the Playwright framework with which we code the scrapers, Python itself. So that actually the tech stack is all from free, often open source software. So then the only issue is the deployment cost of like paying for all this in the cloud. So sometimes we lean on the Canadian Digital Research Alliance, which offers a fair amount of free infrastructure to Canadian researchers.
Is that like an academic cloud?
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't have all the accoutrements of something like AWS or Azure or so forth. So we do lean on AWS at the moment. We are hesitant to kind of purchase our own hard drives and servers because then we've got to think about physical security, and we'd need to pay systems administrators and network folks and so forth to keep running that locally on campus. So that's our solution so far. But the storage costs are not so bad. I think it's the compute costs mainly that multiply pretty fast. And GPUs. When you want to actually do some of the, because we're using large language models, right, to generate. Let me show you. Yeah, like for example, this heat map, right? We're disaggregating. It's really hard to read on here for all of you, but we're disaggregating what different political parties we're talking about. But it's not based on keyword searches; it's based on topic modeling. So we're using, a large language model to sort the posts into different topics like healthcare or inequality or housing crisis or so forth. And then when we do the semantic similarity mapping as well, we're relying on large language models to do all of that. That involves GPUs, and GPUs are expensive to rent. So there, we're very grateful for the Canadian Research Digital Alliance to be able to minimize costs there.
Lovely. Just gonna, I know we're coming close on time, but I want to at least have one online question, have a little space. And if not, don't worry, there's also a main presenters breakout room. Nabia, do we see any online questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was the amazing presentation. So I just tried my best to find someone to get the question, but no, I didn't get anyone. But yeah,
No worries. We also have the main presenter breakout room. This is all right because we are running close on time. Thank you again.
yeah.
Have a lovely, lovely round of applause for us because you did. Thank you again, Dr. Alexei Abraham.